April 12. 1945. Hagen, North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. United States roadblocks on the approaches to the Lenne and Volme valleys receive columns of German soldiers who have already stacked their rifles and raised improvised white flags. The encirclement that created this movement closed on April 1st, when United States First Army and United States Ninth Army met near Lippstadt, sealing Army Group B, in an area that ran from Duisburg and Essen through Bochum and Dortmund to Dasse, the edge of the Sauerland. Field Marshal Walter Model commanded the trapped force. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group directed the reduction from the west and south, while British formations pressed east across the North German plain. Inside the pocket, organized resistance broke into local strongpoints, while large bodies of troops moved toward American lines to surrender. The United States side prepared for scale rather than spectacle. Temporary prisoner of war enclosures were fenced in fields near Wuppertal-Remscheid-Iserlohn and along the Ruhr and Lenne river corridors. Engineer units laid wire, dug drainage, and marked lanes. Quartermaster units moved rations forward. Military police controlled intake points, searched for weapons, and separated officers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted men. Intelligence sections recorded names, ranks, serial numbers, and unit identifications in order to map the disintegration of German corps and divisions as they arrived at the wire. The motivation driving thousands to turn west was practical, and widely reported at the time a desire to avoid capture by the Red Army and a belief that conditions in American custody would be systematic and regulated. Word of the United States and Soviet link-up moving toward the Elbe strengthened that calculation. With the possibility of being cut off from the American front, many German units shifted march routes to reach United States formations while it was still possible. This choice did not produce a single dramatic moment. It produced a daily tide along many roads. The geography of intake reflected the network of railways and highways that had sustained the Ruhr's industry. Near Essen and Bochum, surrendering groups moved out of factory districts toward American checkpoints established at major intersections. Near Dortmund, concentrations formed on open ground adjacent to airfields and rail yards. In the south, around Lüdenscheid and Iserlohn, small valleys funneled streams of troops toward bridges guarded by American infantry and military police. The procedure repeated hour after hour: disarm, register, segregate, feed, and move to a rear enclosure. By mid-April, Army Group B ceased to function as a coherent headquarters. Field orders no longer synchronized divisions. Liaison broke down. Fuel and ammunition were exhausted. Field Marshal Walter Model refused to sign a formal surrender for the Ruhr Command and instead dissolved Army Group B. That decision accelerated individual and unit capitulations along the entire pocket. The numbers recorded by American headquarters are precise because the process was bureaucratic by design. In the Ruhr alone, approximately 317,000 prisoners were counted by April 18th, with additional captures continuing as isolated groups emerged from woods and factory complexes. The scale required constant expansion of wire perimeters and continuous shuttle movements by truck columns to larger enclosures on the Rhine plain. The American method was visible in small details that repeated from cage to cage. Weapons had bolts removed and were stacked separately from prisoners. Medical teams triaged trench foot, shrapnel wounds, and malnutrition. Chaplains and translators recorded statements that identified Waffen-SS personnel and personnel from police units for separate processing. Officers handed over map cases and marked field orders that later allowed intelligence officers to reconstruct which regiments had attempted local breakouts and which had marched directly to surrender points. Every enclosure had posted rules concerning sanitation, water points, and ration distribution. There was no negotiation about the fact of captivity, only the orderly handling of men in their thousands. The day-to-day demobilization of the Ruhr pocket fit into a larger late-war cadence. On April 25th, American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe near Torgau, a junction that symbolically cut Germany in two. On May 7th at Reims, the German High Command signed the Act of Military Surrender for the Western Front, pending the final act in Berlin the following day. Between those markers, surrender in the West became a routine measured by head counts and truck schedules rather than by set-piece battles. The Ruhr events in April set that tone. The men who chose the road to American lines did so because it was a known procedure with predictable outcomes, paperwork, rations, and transport to fenced fields under guard. In the last industrial heartland, still under German control, the war ended not with a single decisive firefight, but with a continuous transfer of armed forces into custody until the pocket was empty. April 16, 1945. Iserlohn, North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. The town square fills with the bulk of a company of Jagdtigers from Schwerpanzerjägerabteilung 512. Engines cough, then fall silent. The vehicles sit nose to tail along Schillerplatz, their 12.8 centimeters guns elevated and traversed safe. Across the paving stones stands an officer from the 394th Infantry Regiment, United States, 99th Infantry Division, Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Kriz. The exchange is brief. Hatches open. Crews climb down and form ranks. Cameras roll because even in April 1945, the surrender of intact Jagdtigers is not a routine sight. The paperwork records the hour as midday. The weapons are still stocked with ammunition. The decision is not made from exhaustion of steel. It is made from exhaustion of options. The same hour repeats across the Ruhr. Bridges and railheads around Hagen, Wuppertal and Remscheid see long files of infantrymen stepping out of factory districts toward United States checkpoints. The encirclement has been in place since April 1st, when 1st Army and 9th Army met east of the Ruhr and sealed Army Group B into Germany's industrial basin. Inside the ring, local strongpoints fight short, ugly actions and then lift white flags. Outside, the ring trucks and bulldozers write new geometry on farm fields that will become enclosures by nightfall. The figure that emerges in American daily totals is steady and impersonal. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of prisoners. By April 18th, the pocket is effectively broken. By the time final counts are tabulated, approximately 317,000 German soldiers have been taken in the Ruhr alone. The United States method looks the same at Dortmund airfields as it does near the river bends at the Lenne and the Ruhr. Weapons are stacked in cleared rectangles. Bolts are removed. Officers are separated from enlisted men at a rope line. Interpreters move clipboards from group to group and ask for unit designations that will help intelligence officers rebuild the order of battle as it collapses. It is not ceremony. It is not improvisation. It is a procedure that the army has refined since Tunisia and Sicily, now executed at a scale that the Ruhr's road network can feed without pause. The motive that sends men westward is the same one repeated in mess lines and at village pumps for months: avoid the Red Army, accept American custody, and reach a cage before the Elbe link-up cuts the lanes. When American and Soviet patrols shake hands on April 25th at Torgau, that motive hardens into urgency. Where to put the men becomes the next question. The answer is an archipelago of temporary enclosures along the Rhine plain, the Rheinwiesenlager. Between April and September 1945, 19 camps stretch from Remagen, Sinzig and Rheinberg to Bad Kreuznach and Wickrathberg, fenced rectangles of churned earth with engineered drainage ration points and posted rules. Officially, they are prisoner of war, temporary enclosures, and their population swings between 1 and almost 2 million disarmed enemy personnel as surrenders across Western Germany accelerate in late April and early May. Trains are not needed to feed these numbers. Feet and trucks do the work day after day under guard towers newly bolted together from rough timber. At the level of command, the picture narrows to a man and a date. Field Marshal Walter Model understands that an army group is not a command post. It is the sum of formations that no longer report. Fuel is gone. Artillery ammunition is rationed by rumor. Liaison officers cannot find headquarters that still function. He refuses to sign a formal capitulation for the Ruhr command and dissolves Army Group B. On April 21st, in a small wood between Duisburg and Rheinberg, he ends his life with a pistol shot rather than enter Allied captivity. The decision seals a fact that the roadblocks and intake lines have already made obvious the Ruhr fight is over and the rest is processing. Back in Iserlohn, the Jagdtiger crews stand at ease while their hulls steam in the cool air. An American sergeant walks a chalk line along the cobbles and points where to stack the spare track links and pioneer tools. A medic checks a loader's bandaged hand and writes the time in pencil on the dressing. A clerk takes down names and serial numbers, then unit identifications, Schwer Panzerjäger Abteilung 5121, Company. The forms are simple because they must be. Within hours, these men will be on the road again, this time as part of a column moving west toward the Rhine meadows. Their machines will stay behind tall silhouettes against shuttered shop fronts photographed from every angle before being dragged to the side of the square. The town returns to silence in the long light of an April evening. The pattern repeats north and south as the pocket empties into cages and the map loses its last heavy contour lines. Farther east, the Elbe crossing points thicken with patrols and signals flags. West of the river, the United States armies pivot to the next tasks, move prisoners to permanent sites, push supply echelons forward, and maintain contact along the inter-Allied boundary. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of May 7th in Reims, the German High Command signs the instrument that acknowledges what the Ruhr had already shown. In April, the end would arrive as a flow of men into custody, as headcounts on clipboards, as convoys of trucks pulling away from fields of wire. There is no single dramatic cadence to it. There is only the steady sound of boots on roads leading west. April 26, 1945. Torgau, Saxony, Germany. Patrols from the United States and the Soviet Union meet on the Elbe and mark a boundary that turns the westward drift into a race. In villages across Westphalia and Hesse, German officers hear the news and recheck their maps. The calculation hardens reach an American roadblock now, while the lanes are still open. In the Ruhr basin, the process is already routine. Around Dortmund, Essen, Bochum and Wuppertal, the remaining strongpoints fall back to factories and rail yards fire a last exchange and send out emissaries with white flags. Prisoners converge on collection points, where the same signs hang from the same stakes: registration, water, medical, latrine. The lines move in silence, broken only by shouted unit identifications and the clatter of rifles being unloaded and stacked. The makeup of the columns tells the story of a command that no longer exists except on paper. Field grey infantry from divisions that once had full establishments now march beside Luftwaffe, ground crews in blue, and men wearing Volkssturm armbands. Police units arrive with street pistols and a single leather folder of orders. The last tanks and assault guns are abandoned when fuel bows out of the discussion. Engines that cannot be fed are not arguments. Unlike the dramatic named capitulations that punctuate earlier months, these days are measured by daily headcounts and by the expansion of wire enclosures on the Rhine plain. Trucks shuttle in both directions, rations forward, prisoners back. The motive that pushes entire battalions westward is not an anecdote repeated for effect. It is the background music of the spring. Letters from relatives, rumours carried by soldiers on leave from the Eastern Front, and the blunt accounts of refugees moving through Saxony and Silesia all point to the same fear. Men who fought the Red Army know what retribution can look like in burned towns behind the lines. American columns, by contrast, present a known procedure. The Geneva Convention posters are literal documents on a notice board. The food may be thin and the ground wet, but it is a regulated captivity. In company after company the decision is argued, then taken turn the march route toward the bridges guarded by American infantry and military police. South of the Ruhr in Thuringia and northern Bavaria, the pattern repeats along river crossings and airfields. Patrols accept groups by the hundred at crossroads where traffic control points have been established since morning. Intake teams separate officers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted men, and screen for Waffen-SS and police formations for special processing. Map cases and code sheets go to intelligence sections that are already rebuilding the order of battle in reverse, tracing the fractures of corps and divisions through the answers, written in block letters on registration cards. Medical officers and aid men move from cluster to cluster with iodine bottles and rolls of gauze. On every perimeter the rules are the same: no movement without permission, no weapons. Keep the lanes clear. It is not show, it is throughput. The geography of the cages follows the logic of logistics. Along the west bank of the Rhine, Temporary enclosures open at sites chosen for road access and flat ground, Remagen, Sinzig, Rheinberg, Bad Kreuznach, Wick-Rathburg, and others. Fences appear in squares and rectangles that grow week by week. Drainage ditches cut by engineer units keep the mud from swallowing the walkways. Water points are marked with painted boards. Ration points issue tins and bread at fixed hours. Guards rotate from line duty to tower posts and back again. As the numbers swell through late April and early May, columns of prisoners march between these fields like tides between basins, redistributed to keep any single enclosure from overflowing. Command decisions at the top confirm what the road traffic already shows. Army Group B no longer functions as a coordinate for action. Its subordinate armies and corps have lost fuel liaison and the simple ability to get orders through. The refusal to sign a formal capitulation in the Ruhr leaves no coherent alternative. The headquarters dissolves, the men walk. In the north, British advances press toward the Kiel Canal and Hamburg, and German formations there also angle southwest, seeking to cross into American custody, while staying ahead of the shifting inter-Allied line. In the south, formations retreat toward the Danube and the Alps, and wherever possible try to intersect the frontage of the United States armies before the frontier with the Soviet sphere firms up. By the first week of May, the cadence is unmistakable. At Reims, in the early hours of May 7th, the surrender document acknowledges a military reality that the intake sergeants and intelligence clerks have been writing down for a month. The end is not a crescendo of barrels and tracers in the industrial valleys. It is the steady transfer of armed men into guarded fields, the flattening of command hierarchies into alphabetical lists, and the conversion of divisions into head counts. The Ruhr gives the template an industrial heartland, ringed its garrisons deprived of movement, and fuel its commanders unable to make telephone calls that change outcomes, its soldiers comparing two fates and choosing the one with paperwork. The last days inside the pocket fold into memory, in the same plain details that filled the notebooks. Boots leave dark prints on wet planks laid over new dug ditches. A mechanic from a disbanded Luftwaffe maintenance unit uses a rag to wipe grease from his hands before he signs his card. A quartermaster detail tips bread into outstretched helmets. At dusk, a guard checks the wire with a flashlight and marks a loose staple for repair in the morning. Beyond the perimeter, the chimneys that once signalled shifts in steelworks stand cold against a sky that no longer flashes at night. When trucks arrive at first light, the guards call out numbers, the lines form, and another convoy turns onto a road leading west. The choice that made the columns start has now become the act that ends the war, for the men in them step forward, be counted, and leave the battlefield behind under an American sky. May 2nd, 1945. Rheinberg, North Rhine, Westphalia, Germany. Morning fog lifts off flat pasture that yesterday was only fence posts and chalk lines. By noon it is a functioning enclosure with numbered blocks, drainage, ditches, ration points, and a lane wide enough for 2 trucks to pass without stopping. The traffic comes in bursts columns from the Ruhr, funneled through crossroads at Meurs and Camp Lintfort, escorted by United States infantry and military police. The routine is the same everywhere on the west bank of the Rhine. Weapons are stacked without bolts in marked rectangles. Officers are separated from non-commissioned officers and enlisted men. Interpreters move clipboard to clipboard and collect the same details in block letters that intelligence sections use to rebuild a shattered order of battle in reverse name, rank, serial, unit, place of capture. The paperwork does not glamorize the moment, it archives it. The men who step through the gates come from formations that on any map printed a year earlier would have been written in heavy type. Infantry divisions that once had full establishments now arrive as cadres without transport. Artillerymen appear without guns because ammunition ran out before the fuel did. Luftwaffe ground crews come with tool rolls and no aircraft to service. Police units and Volkssturm detachments walk in under handmade flags and wait at the rope line with the rest. There are no speeches. There is a posted list water hours, latrine locations, medical station ration times. Guards rotate off perimeter posts with the same tired gait as the men inside the wire. From these fields, the system extends outward, like a rail map. Some enclosures serve only as first intake. Others are designated for longer holding, before transfer to permanent prisoner of war camps in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, or within the occupation zones once boundaries harden. Quartermaster officers plan the flow like cargo, but what moves is people truck convoys in both directions, bringing tins, bread, medical supplies in, and carrying columns of prisoners out to railheads that connect the river plain to depots. Farther west. The arithmetic scales quickly because it must. The Ruhr alone has produced roughly 317,000 prisoners by April 18th. Surrender accelerates in the last days of the month. By early May, the daily totals in Western Germany rise and fall like a tide table. Discipline inside the enclosures follows a template learned over years of war and revised with every new influx. Sanitation is enforced even when ground conditions make enforcement feel like a theory. Engineers deepen ditches after every rainfall. Water points are guarded to prevent crowding. Medical teams triage trench foot, dysentery, shrapnel wounds and malnutrition and tag the worst cases for evacuation to hospitals under guard. Translators flag Waffen SS personnel and men from police formations for separate processing. Chaplains record statements for families, and when asked, stand beside graves, hastily marked beyond the fence line for those who do not survive the last weeks of illness. None of this is spectacle. It is administration under strain. Commanders on both sides of the wire understand that the strategic shape is already fixed. On April 25th, patrols from the United States and the Soviet Union met at the Elbe near Torgau. That handshake reduced the map of choices for every German formation still moving. In the north, British columns push toward Hamburg and the Kiel Canal, and the same westward drift pulls units into their path. In the south, formations retreating through Bavaria try to intersect the frontage of the United States armies before the inter-Allied boundary hardens. Every day between the Elbe link-up and the surrender signatures at Reims and Berlin narrows the lanes and raises the urgency. The enclosures on the Rhine are not an afterthought. They are the operational end of a campaign designed to make resistance irrelevant by denying movement and fuel, and by making surrender a predictable process. Within the fields, the human texture is plain. A former artillery battery commander stands in line with a factory clerk who wore a Volkssturm armband last week. A Luftwaffe mechanic folds his oil-stained rag as if work might resume if only someone called his name. A quartermaster detail tips bread into helmets and empty ration tins. A guard walks the wire at dusk and taps loose staples with the butt of his rifle to seat them deeper into fresh timber. In the office tent, a sergeant squares stacks of registration cards and pins a note to the top transfer detail, at first Light 1000, to railhead priority medical cases on the first trucks. The sergeant does not write adjectives, he writes numbers. The larger cadence carries beyond these rectangles of churned earth. On May 7th at Reims, the German High Command signs a document that brings Western operations to a formal close. The following day in Berlin, the final signatures complete it. For the men inside the wire, the news arrives as a rumor that becomes a sentence spoken at the fence, and then as an order of the day read from a sheet clipped to a board. The change is not a cheer, it is a schedule. The same trucks that brought them here will move them again. The same clipboards will record the movement. The same guards will count the heads. What began in the Ruhr as a decision to turn west rather than east ends here as a line that shortens each morning when numbers are called for transfer. The war in this sector resolves into what it has already been for weeks, a managed flow of men who chose the predictable procedure of American custody over any other fate, and who now watch the sun rise over fences that will in time be behind them. May 8th, 1945, Rheinberg, North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany. Dawn builds a grey line under low cloud, and the guard whistles start their rounds. A notice board at the gate carries a single new line, typed yesterday evening, cessation of hostilities effective today. Inside the wire, there is no ceremony, only a schedule. Roll call by block. Water points open at fixed hours. Medical tent takes the worst cases first. Trucks back into the lane with brakes sighing the same as yesterday. The word that moved men for a month has become the rule on paper, but the procedure does not change with the date. The convoy commanders have their routes marked in pencil. One column goes west toward the junctions near Meurs, and then south along the Rhine to railheads that feed into larger camps. Another loops toward Remagen and Sinzig, where new rectangles of wire have been staked into meadows and numbered by rows. The ground is still soft from night rain. Engineers thicken the gravel where the wheels cut ruts. A quartermaster detail lifts crates off a tailgate and sets them on planks so they will not sink. The system learns and repairs itself as it moves. Men step into files with their cards in hand. The cards carry the same data the intake sergeants have taken for weeks: name, rank, unit, serial place of capture. Interpreters point to the blanks with a stub of pencil and wait for the block letters. Officers go one way, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted men another Waffen-SS and police units to screened sections. A clerk pulls a rubber stamp down on each card, and the ink leaves a rectangle that means approval to move. The line shuffles forward. The noise is the same as any rail station metal on wood boots on planks' low voices. The only difference is the fences. North along the river, the picture is identical. Rheinberg, Wickrathberg, Bad Kreuznach, and other sites add capacity as the numbers ebb and flow through May. The rectangles are not permanent, they are transit. Some men will go to longer-term camps in Belgium and France. Some will remain on the Rhine plain until boundaries and transportation settle. Each morning the boards go up, work details, water latrines, medical ration hours. Each evening the boards come down, and the guards walk the wire with flashlights to check staples and tie-downs. When the wind comes up, the new fences hum. The logic that sent entire formations west is still visible on the roads outside the wire. Westphalia and the Ruhr basin sit at the hinge of the front, where transport is intact enough to move without detour. Bridges thrown by engineers in April still hold. Railway yards that were not destroyed now serve as funnels rather than targets. It is easier to march toward these nodes than to gamble on broken lines toward the east. News from the Elbe link-up at Torgau confirms that the map has narrowed to corridors. The American side keeps those corridors open in one direction and closed in the other. The choice becomes a path. The path becomes a line of men. South of the Ruhr, the same cadence carries through Thuringia. At airfields near Gotha and Erfurt, United States patrols accept groups by the 100 stack weapons and separate ranks under rope lines. Map cases with marked overlays and typed orders go to intelligence officers who sort them by corps and division to reconstruct the collapse in reverse. Even the paper tells a story march routes altered to point west local commands, reducing strong points, and sending out emissaries' fuel notes that end in numbers too small to support any armoured movement. When the files are complete, the names of units that once filled maps in heavy type are now rows on a board, in a tent with a single bulb. A rain squall blurs the hills west of the Rhine, and the meadows turn slick again. Engineers deepen the drainage ditches around the blocks and lay more planks on the paths between water points and the ration lines. The medical tent admits cases of trench foot and dysentery and tags evacuees for movement to hospitals under guard. Chaplains stand by graves under simple markers near the perimeter and write down names to send up the chain. The work is not dramatic. It is maintenance under pressure. The sum of it is a population that can be moved when the trucks arrive. The end of fighting brings a different kind of motion. Prisoners who entered the cages in April begin to leave in May as transfer orders come down. Columns form at first light and march by hundreds to railheads where freight cars wait with doors open. Guards count heads, compare totals to the cards, and mark the numbers on clipboards. The cars rattle west in slow strings through yards that once fed steelworks and now feed camps. The men inside sit on the floors in ranks and pass water tins along the line. When the trains stop at sidings, guards open doors and check the count again. The math is the discipline. Across the river towns, the signs of industry are quiet. Chimneys that once smoked around Essen and Bochum stand against a sky flattened by low cloud. Factory gates open for the first time in weeks, not for shifts but for inspection teams. In the countryside, barns that saw field kitchens and casualty stations in April hold tools and fodder again. The noise changes from artillery in the distance to trucks on hardtop. The last reports from outlying strongpoints come in and are filed. The files go into crates, and the crates go into trucks bound for headquarters that will move again as zones are drawn. Night drops early under the weather. In one enclosure, a guard walks the line and taps a loose staple into a post with the butt of his rifle. In another, a detail covers bread crates with a ground sheet to keep off the drizzle. A clerk sharpens a pencil with a pocket knife and reorders the stack of cards for the morning convoy. The boards are ready. Number of men to the railhead, number to the hospital, number to a longer-term camp. The men who chose the American road in April stand in the dark and wait for their numbers to be called. The war for them is now a schedule and a direction. When the trucks come at first light, they climb up and sit facing west. May 12th, 1945. Bad Kreuznach, Rhineland-Palatinate, Germany. Dawn light pushes through ground mist and shows neat rows of stakes that were not there a week ago. The field is numbered by block and aisle. A signboard lists hours for water rations, medical and work details. Trucks nose in off the road and idle, while guards swing the tailgates open. A clerk in a canvas chair sets a wooden box on his knees and begins to stamp cards. The routine has the weight of habit now. Lines form. Officers move to one side, non-commissioned officers to another, enlisted ranks to the largest corral. A screened lane takes men identified as Waffen SS and police units to a separate section. There is no crowd noise. Boots move on, plank walkways laid over mud that still pulls at the heels. The flow is two-way all day. Quartermaster columns bring crates that thump onto timber skids, bread tins, medical dressings, blankets. Empty trucks return to the gate and take on men for movement to railheads at Bingen and Gau-Algesheim. Guards count heads by tens and mark totals with pencil on clipboards. The rhythm is so fixed that the sound of a dropped mess tin carries across the block. What began in April as an emergency has become a schedule that can be read at a glance from any guard tower. Beyond the wire, the road map is turning into a network of exit lines. Westphalia has already emptied its largest pockets into the wire fields. The Ruhr's factories no longer sound shift whistles. Ruhrort and Duisburg docks send barges that carry supplies upriver and not coal downriver. North on the plain fences at Rheinberg and Wick-Rathburg take transfers from outlying posts and cycle them to longer-term camps farther west. South toward the Nahe and the Rhine bends, new rectangles of wire appear in pastures where cattle stood in March. Engineers arrive with coils of wire and leave behind numbered rows by nightfall. There is nothing improvised in the pattern now. It is an administrative map laid over a battlefield that has gone quiet. Orders come down that alter headings on the chalkboards without changing the feel of the day. Some convoys now turn toward transfer points that feed into camps in France and Belgium at the request of Allied commands responsible for labour and reconstruction. Rail guards repeat the procedure at every stop. Count off, compare to cards, mark the sheet, move the train. When a siding backs up, trucks take over and push columns by road to the next junction. The scale is visible at the simplest level. A stack of registration cards that stood a hand high in April is now a pile tied with twine that needs two hands to lift. Inside the wire, the work of keeping the place alive never lets up. Water points are posted and guarded to keep lines straight. Drainage ditches are deepened after every rain. A medical tent signs in men with trench-foot dysentery, shrapnel, wounds that never saw a surgeon, and the long, thin look that comes from weeks of short rations. The worst cases ride to hospitals under guard. Chaplains and clerks take down names for families and copy them onto sheets that will move outward through headquarters. Translators work table to table and gather unit identifiers that let intelligence officers reconstruct who stood where on a map that no longer matches the ground. The status words on forms begin to shift as commands align to occupation duties. The effect at the fence is practical rather than symbolic. Guards still call blocks by number. Work parties still move with tools to clear ditches and build walkways. Intake and transfer still dominate the hours between reveille and lights out. Men who marched west in April now watch their comrades leave in May, file by file toward other camps beyond the river, and in time beyond the frontier. The talk in the lines is about routes and not about battles. A man from an artillery regiment explains that his battery ran out of shells before it ran out of fuel. A mechanic from an air park folds an oil rag and puts it in his breast pocket, though he knows he will not need it again for a long time. A Volkssturm clerk stares at his shoes and moves when the line moves. On the roads outside, signs from United States traffic control detachments still point toward the same collection points that have governed movement since the pocket closed. Black arrows on white boards fix the direction at every junction. Bridgeheads that engineers stapled across streams in April still carry trucks hour after hour. The air is quiet enough now that the smallest sounds mark time. A guard's whistle at the gate, the click of a stamp on a card, the squeak of a wheelbarrow axle in need of grease. All of it adds up to a sentence written across the region: the war here ends as throughput. By late afternoon, the light flattens and turns the wire into dark lines. A corporal walks the perimeter and taps each staple with the butt of his rifle. In a tent near the gate, 2 clerks set cards into stacks by destination. 1 stack to a railhead to the west, 1 stack to a hospital, 1 stack to return for work details inside the wire. A sergeant totals the day's counts and writes the number on a sheet that will ride to a headquarters in a truck that has the route memorized. When the numbers are added to numbers from other fields, the sum is a picture that operations officers already know by feel. The great pocket that once filled maps from Essen to Iserlohn has been emptied by feet, by pencils, and by trucks. Night comes without guns. A thin rain starts and stops. A guard nails a tarred sheet over a crate of bread. Somewhere beyond the river a locomotive calls once, and the sound hangs in the wet air. Men settle under blankets and wait for morning. When the trucks arrive at first light, the same hands will tighten the same tailgate chains, the same clipboards will open to the same ruled lines, and the same numbers will step forward when called. The decision that sent entire German formations west in April has reached its quiet conclusion in May. Under cloud and wire on roads that point to the sea, the outcome reads like a ledger that is almost closed. May 20th, 1945, Rheinberg to Bingen, Germany. The weather clears and the trucks run without pause. Columns file out of the wire before sunrise, cards stamp totals checked against the clipboard. At each junction, a white arrow sends the convoy toward railheads that were bomb targets 2 months ago and are now funnels. Guards count by tens on the platform and mark the numbers on a sheet that rides with the train. When the doors slide shut, the sound is dull wood on iron, the same sound repeated all along the Rhine plain. Along the route, the landscape shows how quickly a front becomes an administrative belt. Piles of sandbags still ring roadblocks that now wave traffic through. Bridges that engineers stapled across streams in April have wooden guardrails and painted signs. Traffic control detachments stand in the shade of plane trees and rotate their wrists to keep files moving. A fuel truck idles near a junction and feeds the column 1 vehicle at a time. The minutes are small and exact because the scale demands it. Inside the cars, the men sit with their knees drawn up and pass water tins down the line. The talk is short, phrases about destinations, Belgium, France, the coast. A sergeant from an infantry regiment folds his registration card into a square and slides it into his tunic. A mechanic from a Luftwaffe air park keeps an oil rag in his pocket out of habit and rubs grease from his knuckles that is no longer there. At halts, the guards open the doors, check the count and close them again, pencil tapping the board to keep the numbers in order. Back at the fields, the routine does not slacken. Engineers deepen drainage ditches after a shower turns the walkways slick. Quartermaster details cover bread crates with tarred sheets and mark tins by stack. Medical teams tag evacuees for hospital runs and move stretchers to trucks with their wheels blocked by stones. Translators call for unit identifications in block letters and slide the cards to intelligence clerks, who rebuild the last weeks on maps spread across trestles. The same hands that penciled march routes in April now trace the undoing of those routes by rail and road. Toward evening, light flattens over pasture that was fence line yesterday and is empty today because a convoy pulled out at dawn. A corporal walks the perimeter, taps each staple with the butt of his rifle, and circles the post where the wire sings in the wind. In the office tent, a sergeant totals the day, heads out, heads in heads, held for medical heads transferred to longer-term camps. The pencil breaks and he sharpens it with a knife, blows the dust from the point and writes the last digit. Outside, trucks settle on their springs as the engines cool. The guards roll their shoulders, check the watch, and wait for first light when the next column will point its hood west and the board will start a new line of numbers.